As I promised you, another discussion on our top news stories that we're following. And one of those, of course, is the unemployment figures that came in. So we saw that unemployment in South Africa now stands at 27.6%. This is according to Stats SA's quarterly labour force survey for the first quarter of 2019. What does this mean going forward for 2019? And most importantly, what does this mean for the presidency of Cyril Ramaphosa and all of us, because this affects every single household directly, and this is a huge issue. So to talk more about this, from our Pretoria studio, we're joined by the statistician-general, Risenga Maluleke. Statistician-general, great to have you. Thanks very much for being our guest here on the program.
Always a pleasure, and good morning.
And in studio with us, we're very happy to have Economist Azar Jammine also adding his voice to the conversation. Great to have you. Thanks so much.
Good morning. Thank you, Leanne.
All right. Let's begin off with our statistician general. Break your findings down from us. How did it work, and what are the precise numbers looking like?
The first thing is we have picked up that the number of people that are employed has decreased by 237,000 persons, quarter on quarter. And of course, the number of people that are unemployed has also increased by 62,000 persons. And then that has brought us to the unemployment rate, and that's the official one, of 27.6%. We also have the discouraged work seeker that the numbers have increased to about 3,000. My apologies, have increased by 156,000 to 3 million persons. So when you look at that and go to the expanded definition, we are sitting at 38% unemployment.
And this is very worrying. I mean, it really is. Azar, we look at numbers like this and 38% unemployment. You know, your reaction to the data that was released yesterday?
It was slightly worse than expected. One has to expect that in the first quarter of any year, you do see poor employment figures, because a lot of those who were employed temporarily in the fourth quarter in the retail sector, in the accommodation sector, also in the agricultural sector and harvesting, tend to be laid off in the first quarter. But yesterday's figures were worse than even that one might have expected.
Yeah.
And the unemployment rate, you know, because it's a seasonal factor, the important comparison really is year on year rather than quarter on quarter. And on a year on year basis, the economy lost 86,000 jobs, or 1.2% of the workforce.
Yeah. And it's a great concern, and something that you said, Azar, is important. And I'll ask the statistician general, because you know many think that this number is quite modest and that it actually could be higher. So how is the actual survey conducted? Statistician General, this is for you.
What we do is we go out to the households, 30,000 households, and we ask the respondents to let us know whether they are employed, and if they are not employed, whether they've been looking for employment for the last 4 weeks and 4 days a week. So we use the 4x4 rule in relation to international standards based on ILO recommendations. And of course, if they are not looking for employment, then we have to understand whether they are in long-term unemployment, where we can say that we have about 4.2 million persons that are on long-term unemployment. These are people that have been unemployed for a year or longer, and certainly in that 6.2 million, we only have about 1.9 million, that's about 2 million of those persons who are unemployed for a period of less than a year. And if they are not looking for employment, we need to know their reasons. Are they at school, too young or too old to work, so that we can safely eliminate those persons that are not economically active and focus on those that are economically active, as in looking for employment and or employed at the time.
I mean, the number, just to quote your statistics, saying that of the 20.3 million young people aged between 15 and 34 years, 40.7% were not in employment, education or training. And that worries you. That is the biggest concern here, because as I bring you in here, when the youth are sitting idle with nothing to do, nowhere to go, many do have degrees and they can't find jobs. Others finish school and they have no opportunity to go out and further their studies, or no will to want to do so, or no money to do so. This is where the trouble starts brewing.
You've summarized all the main reasons why people are without jobs. First of all, though, just to make it quite clear, the proportion of graduates without jobs is very much smaller. It's around 7% compared with the general unemployment rate that is so much higher. So education does play a huge role in making people more employable. And that is something that speaks to the educational system in South Africa, which is generating matric qualifications, or even more than that, that are not suitable for the workplace.
Yeah, which is quite interesting when you say that. I mean, matrics that are not suitable for the workplace, and yet we are lacking so many skills in this country. And that's one of the big problems, that we have this gap where we have to outsource skills to other countries because we don't have it here.
Well, we often do have skills in this country, but due to transformational imperatives, they are not employed. But over and above that, what happens is the skilled people are then in a position to demand very high pay relative to the unskilled, and that contributes towards rising inequality, unfortunately.
If we look deeper into the different industries, and that perhaps will give us an indication, Risenga, where we're at in terms of where we saw the biggest job growth. What industries are looking good at the moment?
Let us look at construction, for example. It is one of the areas where we have lost a lot of jobs, quarter on quarter. That is 142,000 jobs, particularly in the building of completed structures, as well as in the installations of that occur within those structures. We also lost employment in the area of services, about 50,000 of those, in the area of sewage and sanitation and refuse removal and related activities. We also lost 94,000 jobs in finance, in the areas of insurance as well as pension funding, but also in business activities not elsewhere classified, like your consultancy and the like. That is your quarter on quarter. But if you look at finance, for example, on a year-on-year, so that's when you look long-term, it hasn't lost as much employment, because it gained another 114,000 jobs. But in relation to construction, it shows that it's an industry under duress, because even when we look at the year-on-year, it has lost another 92,000 jobs, to be exact. So these are the areas where we didn't perform well. But we also looked at private households, where we lost about 31,000 jobs. So these are the biggest contributors in the area of unemployment.
Sure. And one you didn't mention, and forgive me if you did, I may have missed it, but mining. I mean, we shed 20,000 jobs in mining, which is the sector that is really, the pillar of the South African economy, as well as agriculture. It's also down 12,000 jobs. Azar, let me bring you in. What do you make of these sectors that are shedding jobs? I saw your face when we said sort of basic services, municipal services, jobs are down there. Yes. What's changed?
Well, because essentially that is where you would hope that there would be job creation to provide improved service delivery. But firstly, the government is under pressure to cut back on public service, on the size of the public service, in order not to overspend. because there have been many corrupt activities and state capture that has used up many government funds. It's leaving less behind. The other thing, though, in the mining sector, you've got to realize that there's been extremely militant industrial action, and employers in the mining sector just have no incentive to employ more workers there. And as for agriculture and domestic work, one wonders the extent to which the minimum wage legislation introduced last year is contributing towards a lot of these people being laid off because they have become unaffordable for poorer employers.
Yeah, very interesting to look at that one. However, there is a little bit of good news, Statistician-General. The transport industry, we saw 59,000 jobs created, in trade 25,000, utilities 16, and manufacturing 14. So those are the industries that are actually growing at this point.
Certainly, but before we come to that, you have touched on agriculture and mining as the sectors that are driving the economy of the country. But when you look at the share of nominal GDP, finance and services, that is public and social services, are your biggest contributors to nominal GDP, accounting for about 24% and in services, and again 19% in finance, somewhere there. Actually, vice versa. Now, agriculture accounts for about 1% of the last quarter of 2018. And in this regard, although it has lost some jobs, about 12,000 jobs in this quarter, it accounted only for 5.1% of the jobs. So certainly it's not where the economy is being driven. We may be looking at large tracts of land as we are driving, but the biggest contributors are services, finance, government as well as your trade and manufacturing. Now, as regards transport, the number of jobs, the 59,000 jobs that were gained in this quarter, first quarter of 2019, were largely in land transport and related auxiliary services of land transport.
Yeah. Statistician-General, I thank you very, very much. Unfortunately, we can't follow up more on that due to time, but I think you've given us a great glimpse into the numbers that were released, but also to add to that, the provinces that did the worst, and that's another conversation we need to have when it comes to unemployment, are the Free State and the Eastern Cape. But I'm going to steal this minute into news headlines because it is part of our news headlines, and I want to ask you, Azar, how do we get around this? It's a question we've asked our viewers. How do we create jobs in South Africa where constantly these numbers are going down and down and down?
It's a multifaceted issue. First and foremost, from a longer-term point of view, we've got to improve the education and skills of this country to make them more aligned to to add value and to be what the business sector really wants and what the economy generally needs. Secondly, we have to sort out our industrial relations. At the moment, the relationship between employers and workers is far too adversarial, and if you keep having, you have a fourfold increase in the quantity of strike action at a time when there's such high unemployment, you're not going to create jobs. Businesses just don't want to employ people on a full-time basis. Thirdly, the structure of the economy is far too geared towards big business, organized labor, powerful trade unions, and big government and state-owned enterprises. Small business activity is just completely neglected, and that's where a lot of the job creation needs to be created.
And we haven't even touched on what load shedding did and the effects thereof, so that we'll look at it another time. Azar, thank you very, very much for joining us. Chief Economist at Econometrics, Dr. Azar Jammine, and Risenga Maluleke in our Pretoria studio, the Statistician-General. All right, let's cross